I have two seeds, same plant, same variety, but this seed is almost guaranteed to germinate. And this seed may never germinate if I use common seed starting methods. The difference is what I did to this seed ahead of time, because it requires something a little different. Join me today as I discuss seed stratification and seed scarification. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott, and the reasons why we need to scarify or stratify our seeds begins here on a cold, snowy, wintry day. These are the conditions that many of our native plants and perennial plants have to deal with. They'll flower in summer and fall and set seed, and then sit through the winter. These seeds need to be exposed to these kind of conditions for the germination that we anticipate and expect during the spring. It's 3 degrees Fahrenheit right now outside, so I came inside where it's warmer. The high today is only supposed to reach 12 degrees Fahrenheit. This is the coldest time of year for my Zone 5B garden. And these temperatures are typical for me and even Zone 6 and Zone 7 gardeners. There are very few plants that can actively grow when it's this cold. And so the plants have developed a protective mechanism for their seeds to ensure that the seeds don't inadvertently start growing when the temperatures are going to be this cold. It makes sense why the seeds need protection, because for many of us in autumn, the temperatures still are pretty warm. And so when those flowers set seed and those seeds fall to the soil, the warm conditions should be enough for most of the seeds that we grow to germinate and for small plants to begin growing. But then if those small plants were exposed to the frigid conditions like I'm having right now, that's enough to kill those plants. And so the seeds have a protective shell around them. In most cases, it's thick and hard. And the seeds need to be exposed to very specific conditions to germinate. And that's where stratification and scarification come into the picture. Stratification is exposing the seeds to the cold before we expose them to the warmth required for germination. Scarification is actually physically damaging the shell of the seed to encourage germination. And so as I look at some of these seed packets, we can see an example of what this means in practice, because the good seed companies will tell you when you need to stratify or scarify your seeds. And so these from Prairie Moon Nursery, this cardinal flower says that the seeds need a 30-day period of cold, moist conditions. This Bush's poppy mallow needs 60 days of a cold, moist environment before we can begin germinating. And this Canada anemone, well, it actually requires 2 cycles. It needs the cold, followed by the warmth, and then at the end of the season, a whole season later, more cold and more warmth. So to seed these yourselves is actually going to take 2 full seasons. As I look at these seeds from Swallowtail Garden, this firecracker vine specifically says to nick the pointed end with clippers to speed germination. It's the same for the moon vine. Nick the pointed end with clippers, and this cardinal climber as well. I need to scarify. I need to damage the seed by nicking the pointed end with nail clippers. While the seed packet specifically says to use nail clippers to nick the seed, there are other tools we can use to accomplish the same purpose. And I'll be showing how to do that with all of these different tools. Now, I know that the idea of intentionally damaging your seeds runs counter to most of what you know about gardening. We're supposed to protect our seeds, but we're talking about very specific plants where the seeds need these kind of conditions. And you have to think about how these plants are growing in nature. They're being exposed to the frigid conditions and the thaw and the freeze and the thaw. And that freeze-thaw cycle is enough to damage most seeds. Over time, the shell of the seed will develop small fissures as it expands and contracts with the changing temperatures. And then in the spring, when it warms up to the point that germination can begin, well, the melting snow and the rain can actually begin to enter the seed through those fissures. And so the water and the warmth means that those seeds will germinate at the appropriate time of spring. There are other seeds that actually need to be exposed to animals' intestinal tracts, where the animal will eat the fruit or the flower, and the seed will travel through the stomach into the intestines, and the acids will accomplish the same thing. They'll damage the shell of the seed, and so in the spring, they'll pop up once they get that warmth and once they get that moisture. And so what we need to do with the seeds that need scarification is to use our own tools to break through the seed and create those fissures or weak points. And so nail clippers, as we've already talked about, is a very common option. We can also use a nail file or an actual file from the shop. Sandpaper works great. Knives are another option. Let me show you how to scarify a seed using these different methods. And I'll use these moonvine seeds. As we take a look at these seeds, we can see that they have a very hard and what looks to be dense shell around it. If you squeeze it, press on it, it has no give. It's very hard. And so to take the recommended method, we look at the seed and we see that there's a flat end and a pointed end. And so we'll take the nail clippers and we'll just clip the tip so that it's damaged. And we're really not trying to cut into the seed. We're just trying to break through the outer shell. And so looking closely at it, we can see there's a color difference. There's the color of the outer shell, and then we can see the lighter color of the seed inside. This seed has been scarified. We can do the same thing using a knife. I suggest that you use a knife only on the bigger seeds. You really don't want to run the risk of cutting yourself. And so with these bigger seeds, just hold it nice and tight, and then using my fingers as a guide, I'm going to make a cut just on the tip of the seed until I start to see the inside of the seed. And so using a knife and seeing that I've broken through the outer shell, this seed has now been scarified. Now, a very important consideration is that once you scarify the seeds, once you break through that outer shell, you've now exposed the inside of the seed. So you need to put these into soil for germination within a brief period. These are no longer protected. It's still a little early for me to actually start these seeds, so I'm going to put the rest of these away, and I'll actually do my real scarification and germination in a period of a few weeks. I'll turn to another plant now. Let's go ahead and look at these cardinal climbers. These are smaller seeds, and so using a knife or even a nail clipper might be a little challenging. So let me show you how we'll use the sandpaper or a file to damage the shell coating of these seeds. We'll go ahead and start with a fingernail file. Take one of these little seeds and just rub it back and forth. And then we'll take a look at the seed, and we can see that same color change. We can see that the dark shell of the seed has now been scraped away, and we can see the lighter colored inner part of the seed. This will be ready for germination. We can do the same thing with the sandpaper. And we can see the lighter inner color of the seed. All we have to do is just break through that shell. And so that's why we can use any of these abrasives to do that. Another method you may see recommended on the seed packet is a hot water treatment, like on this poppy mallow. And when you think about how these plants are growing in the wild, it makes sense. The poppy mallow is growing on the prairies of North America and occasionally will be exposed to wildfires that roll through. And that extreme heat of the fire is enough to damage the seeds. Well, we can copy that in our home kitchen by taking these seeds, putting them into a container, and then pouring boiling water on these seeds. That boiling water replicates those conditions of a wildfire to the point that the shell of the seed should be damaged. And then by letting those seeds stay in the water overnight as it cools down, they'll be ready to sow the next day. You rarely see it in home gardens with the seed packets that we're growing, but an acid treatment is another option. And so for those seeds that might be ingested by animals, an acid treatment might be necessary to break the outer shell of the seed. A lot of universities use that type of method when they're doing a lot of seeds that they need to scarify. It's something that I've never done and I don't anticipate doing, but be aware that it is an option. So this is how you scarify a seed, and few seeds actually need this, but there are quite a few seeds that need that cold stratification. So let me show you what we need to do for that. To get the cold, moist conditions that we need for seed stratification, we just need a reclosable sandwich bag, paper towel, a marker, and a spray bottle. Because many of these seeds need a very specific time frame in the cold, moist conditions, it's helpful to write down the date that you're starting the stratification. And I'll be doing this with the cardinal flowers, so it's also helpful to write down what seeds you're actually stratifying. And I'll take my paper towel, fold it. I've got these cardinal flower seeds. These are a very small seed, so it actually helps to wet the paper towel first. And then I'm going to take these seeds and sprinkle some on this moist paper towel. And so there's actually dozens of seeds on this paper towel now. I'll save some for later. I'll give it another spritz from the spray bottle. Fold it in half again, and then put it inside of this sandwich bag. Wet it again, and I'll periodically check on this just to make sure it's not drying out, and then seal it to help hold in that moisture. And now it's ready for the refrigerator. And so now I'll put this bag into the refrigerator, and the temperature of the refrigerator is ideal for this. And for the seeds that I know I'm going to be stratifying, I'll actually keep the seeds in the refrigerator, kind of as a pre-treatment of the cold before I expose them to the moist conditions as well. Because these seeds require 60 days of stratification, over the course of the next 2 months, I'm going to keep an eye on that bag and make sure the paper towel doesn't dry out. That's why periodically I'll add a spritz of water. These are minimum recommendations. So whether it's 30 days or 60 days, as long as they get that amount of time, they should germinate. But if they're in the refrigerator in that moist, cold environment for longer than that, it's perfectly fine. In nature, they're probably going to be exposed for more than exactly 30 days. So use that for planning purposes, but you don't have to be so precise if you give yourself a buffer and let them stay in a little bit longer. There are other seeds that have that protective coating on their shell that can make them difficult to germinate. Seeds like nasturtium fall into that category. And botanical interests suggests that we soak these seeds for 12 to 24 hours before we sow the seeds. Soaking in water allows the seed to expand and weaken that shell to the point that it can germinate. It does make a difference, and it's a lot easier. You could nick the seed and scrape the seed, but in this case, just soaking it in water is often enough. And most of our vegetable garden seeds really don't need this kind of pre-treatment. That's why we can just start them indoors or start them outdoors without too much difficulty. But for those seeds with a harder, thicker shell, like beans for instance, soaking them ahead of time can make germination a little bit easier. You've probably figured out that this all requires some planning. You need to know ahead of time that these seeds need 60 days in a cold, moist environment, or 30 days, or 2 full seasons. So read your seed packages. Be aware of the requirements for those seeds to germinate long before you anticipate that you're going to start those seeds. Have your planning process in place, and you should have a pretty successful season with the germination and with those seeds beginning to grow. And to learn more about some of those things that you can do to make it easier, consider watching one of these videos next. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.